There is a conversation that we need to have about people that support equality as long as it doesn't impede their own advancement or make them uncomfortable. So in the case of Rachel Nichols, she was perfectly fine uh with diversity hires or with uh helping people of color along, as long as those people of color don't impede on her own progress.
Let me put you on game.
Moving to our last topic of the day, Rachel Nichols.
Ooh.
If you guys are unfamiliar with Rachel Nichols, she is an ESPN anchor who is white, which is relevant for this conversation. And she's been at the center of this controversy recently. And the controversy is she was having a conversation that she thought was private with LeBron James's publicist, I believe, Adam Mendelson, or agent to LeBron James. And she didn't know her camera was on, and the recording was sent to an ESPN server. Uh, and during this conversation, she made some comments that could be considered offensive that were concerning another ESPN anchor, a Black woman, Maria Taylor. And Maria Taylor was chosen to lead the coverage of last year's NBA Finals during the bubble. And Rachel Nichols essentially believed that she was the one that deserved to have that role. So she was quoted as saying, "If you need to give her more things to do because you're feeling pressure about your crappy long-time record on diversity," which, by the way, I know personally from the female side of it, go for it. Just find it somewhere else. You are not going to find it from me or taking my thing away. And there's been a large firestorm of people responding to this and outrage on the part of people coming at Rachel for her comments. And she has since been replaced on the final sideline by Malika Andrews, and Maria Taylor continues to lead the finals coverage for the network. So I just wanted to get your take on how you felt about Rachel's comments and what they mean, for the conversation about race at large or diversity at large.
At first, when I first heard it, I heard it in passing and I saw the headlines and I was like, man, what did this Rachel Nichols do? And I couldn't wait to actually hear the quote. And then I listened to the quote. And when you first listen to the quote, it actually doesn't sound that nefarious. And when you listen to it in full context, what you're kind of hearing on, I guess, at the deep level is Rachel Nichols basically being concerned for her position of influence and power in the company. You know, she wants to be the face of ESPN as far as the basketball sideline to sideline coverage goes, and she wants to have her influence just continue to be what it is, and she doesn't want it to be, replaced or usurped by anybody who is kind of coming underneath her, as most people do. I can relate to the fact that if I have a job, if I have a certain position and it affords me certain, kind of privileges and it's in my contract, whatever, I want to keep that. But it's what she said and insinuated underneath that I think kind of started to bother me as I paid more and more attention to the issue. And essentially, she was saying that ESPN has a bad history with diversity, and that she doesn't want to have her position come at the expense of them just trying to be more diverse.
Right.
And I think that's where you have the biggest, that's a problem. That's a problem in the assumption that Maria Taylor is only getting that position because ESPN is trying to be more diverse, and not because she's earned it herself from working hard and has continued to show excellence, which is why she merits an upgrade or merits to be more featured on their broadcast and on their presentations. And that's
Right.
what I have a problem with. She muddied the conversation by talking about it from an identity politics perspective as opposed to a merits perspective. And that just brings up a whole, cacophony of issues that are underneath the surface. And it's like, okay, so because you made the conversation about race, now the conversation is about race and representation. And now we're going to have the ugly conversation about equity and the lack thereof historically. And you've kind of made it very difficult for the lines to be clear, because at the end of the day, within a company structure, a lot of elbow rubbing happens behind the scenes. A lot of people of influence exert their power and will to kind of get what they want. And sometimes it's based on, sometimes it's based on merit and just who you happen to know. And it's hard to know the difference, but it makes it impossible when you start making those accusations. And
Yeah.
it makes it really frustrating. It's kind of, and I was reading on, and they made it a very tense place at ESPN as a result. Now that those conversations and that point has been brought to light, Maria Taylor has asked for her not to be on shows at the same time as Rachel Nichols. And you're seeing a weird like inclusion where they have to literally pre-record shows in order to have both Rachel Nichols and Maria Taylor appear on the show at the same time, with the appearance that it's live, but it's not. And then, to add salt to the wound, the only people that have been punished were the black person, or was the black person that originally leaked the video, as well as some other sideline reporters that have had their spots and time diminished in order to make more room for Rachel Nichols, as her time has kind of moved away from some of the frontline stuff that she was doing before, and has been given to Maria Taylor. And so this has kind of been an issue, and I didn't even realize this actually happened last year. And so that's about a year ago, and you're still seeing the effects of it now, and it just being brought to light and being in the public consciousness. And it brings up some more questions about performative, social justice, as well as people appearing to be allies on the front and being in Black spaces and kind of reaping the benefits of that, but holding kind of unconscious bias in their hearts, whether knowingly or unknowingly. And I just think that it sucks, to be honest, and it brings up a bigger conversation. How about you?
I echo your sentiments for sure. There's so much going on with this story, and there's not one singular person to blame, or one entity to blame. About Rachel Nichols, I think there is something to be said for the opportunity she's helped to provide with the jump for former players, and most former players are Black. So she has created opportunity for a lot of people, but there is a certain level of ownership that has to be taken on her part, which she has done by apologizing. But at the same time, it does kind of give a bit of a ding to her credibility, because there is a conversation that we need to have about people that support equality, as long as it doesn't impede their own advancement or make them uncomfortable. So in the case of Rachel Nichols, she was perfectly fine with diversity hires, or with helping people of color along, as long as those people of color don't impede on her own progress. So I think that comes off her initiative, and her help in terms of social justice comes off a little bit, it rings a little bit false when you understand that it only goes to a certain point. So there's a conversation to be had about social justice as well. I think that in many ways it's become a very marketable, acceptable, and trendy movement to get behind since the unfortunate murder of George Floyd. But I see it as it's so much easier for people to speak out than it was previously, because there's not as much social or personal capital invested in doing so. Like, it's so much easier to come out and support a movement like Black Lives Matter, or come out and support the LGBTQ plus community, than it was years ago, because there's less people that are going to or corporations that are going to come down on people that express that support. And there are less and less people that are actually willing to sacrifice something in the name of social justice, because it's so much easier to speak out. Like, you're really not risking anything by doing so. So everyone can do it. Like, anyone can post a Black square on Instagram, Like there's not really much investment involved in that. But yeah, sure, post your black square solidarity, it's all cool. But like when it comes down to you actually losing something in the sake of helping to better the lives of others that look different from you or are disenfranchised, like are you really willing to actually go there and do the work, you know? So, and I think that we saw that that may not be the case with Rachel. Like, yeah, sure, she is providing these opportunities for people. Like, again, I don't know her, but from the comments, it does sound like uh she her initiatives and her help in this area kind of has a limit, which is kind of a shame. But I mean, I hope that she takes it as a learning experience. And uh if we want to talk about LeBron's agent, I don't know if he's been fired yet. He probably should be because he was on record also as saying that he was tired of the Me Too movement and of Black Lives Matter and social justice in general. So, you know, there's that. So, I mean, watch the company you keep. It's hard to know who's really out here for you and who's really coming to bat for you. So that's one side of it. But also, I think it would be
Yeah.
remiss of us not to mention. I think you mentioned it a bit as well. ESPN, like ESPN's role in essentially pitting women against each other, because we've had the conversation about like female rappers before, like where we're made to feel that there has to be Nicki versus Cardi or Lil Kim versus Nicki because there's only like one spot for a popular female rapper sometimes, and oh, there's more spots now. But with ESPN, it almost seems like this whole situation. It seems like Rachel and Maria and Malika are all fighting for a limited number of spots that are uh, designated for them when men have a litany of spots to choose from. So it's on ESPN for, like many companies, being diverse, but only doing the bare minimum in terms of diversity in order to appear that they are like a conscientious organization. So it's
Right.
on ESPN as well to own up to the fact that they are putting these women in positions where they have to be at each other's necks, essentially. Or they don't have to be, but it fosters a situation where Rachel can say something like this, because if there is enough spots for everyone, then that's not even a conversation.
Yeah. Um, and there's generally a feast or famine mentality. And so, like you said, the organization that is at the helm of it all has to do a better job of fostering as many opportunities for as many people as possible. Yes, there are limited spots. Yes, there can be limited airtime. But if the history is kind of leaned in one direction, when people leave the company, when spots eventually open up, you as an organization have to be a lot more mindful about putting people who have not or individuals or groups that have necessarily been kind of disenfranchised or at least overlooked, and look at them and say, okay, I think you do deserve this opportunity. And kind of I hate to say this, but I guess maybe give like a little bit of a nudge to some individuals sometimes, like it for the sake of equity, for the sake of representation. Because although some people think that representation is for the sake of representation is vague or not an effective way to lead, um, oftentimes, people's merit as well as their accomplishments do get overlooked. And
Yeah.
because they get overlooked because sometimes it's hard to relate to somebody and their struggle, and or because somebody might be a silent warrior that just kind of does their job without getting the praise. Also in this quote, Rachel Nichols mentioned how she worked her tail off and basically outworked everybody else to get to her position. And she felt like that's what she had to do in order to earn her position. So in the back of her mind, she's just seeing it as, hey, like, I don't want to be punished just for the sake of you guys not having your stuff together. At the same time, though, Maria Taylor is trying to do the same thing. She's also working her butt off. She's also trying to foster relationships. She's also trying to report well. And she wants to be, and she feels like she's a good representative and she is asking for it. She's seeking out those opportunities. So when someone does, it's all fair for them to get whatever position that they're trying to seek. And so it's a complicated conversation. It has a lot of nuance, and I do understand where Rachel Nichols is coming from. But at the same time, the bias that's there and the things that she said that has kind of hurt Maria Taylor, as well as hurt the representation of that organization. It kind of shows you the lack of leadership when it comes to this. You know what I mean? And I think
Yeah.
you identified it well. ESPN has to be better. So
Yeah, there needs to be more accountability from all sides. And I would just caution anyone that's listening to also, like, if you're going to step out in the name of social justice, or if you're going to step out and speak out against injustices, just be ready to and willing to actually have to give something up, to sacrifice something, whether that be your time or whether that be some of your privilege. Like, you have to, if you're going to engage in these public conversations, and if you're going to engage in these public displays of social justice, you have to also be ready to offer something up that's not just performative.
yeah, and
So
also be uncomfortable. Sometimes some people are just not willing to be uncomfortable, to have their thoughts, their preconceived notions and opinions questioned or challenged, because it makes people feel icky. But
yeah,
I feel like that's ultimately where growth happens, when you do feel uncomfortable, when you're pushed to a point where you have to reconcile what you believed with what people are saying. And if there's incongruity, maybe you should listen. Maybe you should actually hear it out, as opposed to turning a blind eye to it.
yeah, yeah, no doubt, bro.